this lesson, we're going to be discussing some of the different security options that you have when creating WLANs in a Catalyst 9800. Let's get started. Let's configure a WLAN. I'm going to add a new WLAN. I'm not actually going to save it in this exercise. We're going to create WLANs in later lessons, but I will show you the basics. Create an SSID name. Enable it. If you want to set radio policies, do that. And the security tab is where I want to show you these options. So for layer 2 security, you have several options here. And in different versions of the Catalyst 9800, you're going to see different options here. This particular version shows WPA plus WPA2 as an option, and WPA2 plus WPA3 is an option, meaning if you want one or both of these, choose this one. If you want one or both of these, choose this one. Some of the Catalyst 9800 builds will say WPA3 only, etc. So be prepared to make a potentially slightly different selection here. I'm going to choose WPA2 plus WPA3, and I'm going to scroll down. Protected management frames, you'll notice, is set to optional currently. Let's first select just a WPA2 policy. That means this is going to be a WPA2 only WLAN. If you wanted to create a transition WLAN that allows both WPA2 and WPA3, enable both. However, understand that there are security implications with that. The WLAN is only as secure as the weakest security measure that is enabled, which in this case would be WPA2. So typically avoid transition mechanisms if possible. So to start, WPA2 only. AES 128 is the standard encryption. And then for authentication key management, 802.1x if you want to do user and password authentication or certificate authentication, or you can choose pre-shared key if you want to create a pre-shared key. Scroll down, you'll enter your pre-shared key here if you've chosen PSK above. And something that you need to pay particular attention to is this PSK type. This is often confusing. Unencrypted is what you want it to say if you're typing in a key or if you are pasting in a passphrase. AES is your other option, and if you choose AES, it's expecting an AES encrypted key. The key itself has already been encrypted and it's not clear text. That's often not what you're going to choose. Unencrypted is the standard means of entering in a key. And if you choose AES here thinking, well, I want to do AES encryption, it won't accept a regular key. You have to actually paste an encrypted key. So set that to unencrypted, type in your PSK, and you're done. Now I also want to show a couple other things up here about fast transition. So fast transition mode, there are several options here: disabled, enabled, and adaptive enabled. And you'll need to configure things differently depending on what you select here. Fast transition is 802.11r, which by its standard is not backwards compatible, meaning if you set this to enabled, only devices that support 802.11r can connect to this WLAN. If you set it to disabled, 802.11r is not used, so anything can connect, even devices that do support 802.11r. And the third option is adaptive enabled. And adaptive enabled is something that is specific to Cisco wireless controllers, in that there's an additional exchange that occurs when a device associates. In certain device types, at the time of this recording, Apple iPhones, Apple iPads, and Samsung Galaxy smartphones and tablets, or recent versions, Galaxy S10 and newer, I believe, support automatic 802.11r. So that means you can set this to adaptive enabled, and devices that don't support 802.11r can still connect. Those special devices that I just mentioned will negotiate with the controller and allow 802.11r to be enabled just for those specific devices. And that's great because it allows anything to connect and allows you to take advantage of 802.11r for those special devices that can do that initial exchange. Understand that any other device that has 802.11r configured or is capable of it won't be using 802.11r on this WLAN. So this is only enabled for those special device types that I mentioned. Now, when you have this set to adaptive enabled, you can select just 802.1x or pre-shared key as you would for a regular non-802.11r WLAN. And again, it will automatically enable the fast transition modes for those special types of devices. But if you set this to enabled, where you're forcing 802.11r, you need to make a different selection down here. Instead of just pre-shared key or 802.1x, you need to select fast transition plus 802.1x or fast transition plus pre-shared key. And the reason for that is it uses a different mechanism for key management. And if you have the top option here selected, it won't use 802.11r essentially. And it's also important to note that you only need to check the fast transition. You don't also check the pre-shared key and fast transition pre-S key. When you do that, the controller attempts to make the WLAN backwards compatible with non-802.11r devices. Doesn't really work, so just check the fast transition box for the type of WLAN that you're creating. Set this back to disabled, and now I'm going to create a WPA3 WLAN and show you the slight differences there. So I'm going to uncheck WPA2 policy, and I'm going to check WPA3 policy, meaning that only WPA3 capable devices can connect. Something changed above that you may not have seen. Protected management frames now set to required, because that is a requirement for WPA3. So it automatically changes that as you select different options here. If you have WPA3 selected, it's required. If you have WPA2 selected, it is optional. So again, I'm going to select WPA3. AES 128 is the standard encryption, even for WPA3. And you can choose a few different options down here. You'll notice pre-shared key is gone. That's because pre-shared key for WPA3 is actually called SAE, or simultaneous authentication of equals. So if you want to do a pre-shared key or a passphrase style WLAN with WPA3, you'd select SAE, and you'd go down here and type your pre-shared key in unencrypted fashion, just like you would with WPA2. 802.1x, 802.1x, just like normal. And then OWE, or Opportunistic Web Encryption, is enhanced open. That's for automatic encryption of open guest traffic. No authentication, just encryption. And again, you have fast transition plus 802.1x if you want to do fast transition. You may have heard also about another type of WPA3 encryption called Suite B. And Suite B encryption is 192-bit, and that is enabled by choosing GCMP 256 here, and then you'll notice that the only option for auth key management is Suite B 192. So that's how you access that. It's a little bit confusing because it doesn't even show up here if you have this selected. So you have to know to select GCMP 256, and you'll see Suite B. And if you do GCMP 128, you get Suite B without 192-bit encryption. So various options here. Hopefully that helps explain the different security options that you have when creating WLANs. There's one last thing that I want to touch on here. If you are creating an 802.1x WLAN, like this, there's one additional thing that you need to configure in the SSID, and that is under AAA, you need to select an authentication list. Now, we will get into this later. We'll be configuring an authentication list to use with 802.1x. But at this point, we don't have one configured, but this is where you would select it, and it's very important that that be selected. If you neglect to select an authentication list, the controller does not know how to authenticate users, and they will fail. So that is a required step for an 802.1x WLAN, and only for an 802.1x WLAN.